And I would submit to you, slow down, step back, and take a look at what really has happened in the world in the last 20 and 25 years. And I would submit to you a lot has gone right that we sometimes don't give ourselves credit for. I think back to when I started at a time when the United States and its allies were facing two great empires. The Russian Empire behind an Iron Curtain, Chinese Empire behind a bamboo curtain, both driven by an ideology called communism, which they believed was superior to our ideology, superior to democracy, superior to capitalism. And they were determined to prove it. And if it came to war, they were building up their forces. Our response was to contain them behind the iron and bamboo curtains until truth prevailed. And we would see what happened in due course. And that was all I did for the first 30 years of my adult life. Contain the bad guys. So as a young lieutenant, right after Benning, they sent me to the Iron Curtain, a place called the Fulda Gap. My commander took me up there and said, Lieutenant Powell, with your 40 soldiers, you guard between these two trees. When the Russian army comes, you stop it. Hey man, no problem, I'm from New York. 28 years later, I had served 2 years in Vietnam, a year in Korea. 28 years later, I'm now a lieutenant general, 3 stars. I have command of 75,000 soldiers, right back at the same place, the Fulda Gap. Mission was the same, slightly wider section. When the Russian army comes, you stop it. This is great. I studied for 3 decades to do this. I know exactly what it's all about, and the world is coherent and understandable to me. And then, within 8 months, it all started to come apart. All started to come apart. And the world as I knew it, the world as you knew it in your earlier days, suddenly disappeared before our eyes. And I can date the change rather precisely to the time when, after I gave up command of my corps, I was working for one of the greatest men I've ever had the privilege of working for, President Ronald Reagan, as his national security advisor. And Reagan was a wonderful man. He had a vision about America. He had confidence in America. He had confidence in himself. And he conveyed and portrayed that vision to the rest of the world. People would say, well, he didn't know the details. He didn't have to know the details. That was what we were there for. He had to have a sense of purpose, of what America was all about and what the world was going to be like. And he wanted to work with the Soviet Union to begin with, but he never hesitated to call them an evil empire. You're an evil empire. Mr. Gorbachev, come here to this wall. Tear this wall down. And he kept shoving it at him. But he also wanted to work with them. And he kept reaching out to Gorbachev. Gorbachev was one of the great leaders of history because he saw the reality of the failure of the Soviet Union. And he knew he had to fix it to save it. And so he welcomed President Reagan's overture. And so finally, Reagan had to go visit the evil empire. He had never been to Moscow before. He's getting ready for his trip, and my hotline rings one morning. It's from his office. Mr. National Security Advisor, which I was, the President wants to see you right away. I go down to the Oval Office, I walk in, President Reagan's behind his desk. I go up and say, good morning, sir, how are you? Good morning, Colin, how are you? I'm fine, sir. What's up? Well, you know, Colin, I'm getting ready for my trip to Moscow, but you go first. You go first, and you listen to everything Gorbachev says, and you come back and you tell me it all. Okay, yes, sir. Go to Moscow. Go to the Kremlin. Sit across the table from President Gorbachev. And he's not happy this day. He doesn't think we're responding well enough to all the initiatives he started. Glasnost, openness. He's going to let ideas cross the Iron Curtain, 1985. Beginning of the information revolution, let ideas cross the Iron Curtain. He talked about perestroika. I have to restructure my political and economic systems because they're not working. But this morning he was mad because he didn't think we were responding to these initiatives. So I'm sitting across the table from him in the Kremlin, and he starts taking it out on me. What's wrong with you? I know what's wrong with you. I've seen your KGB file. You're nothing but a general, a soldier. All you've thought about your whole life is fighting people and fighting Russians. What's wrong with you? And all those right-wingers back with the president. You've got to change your way of thinking. You've got to work with me or I'll not be successful. So please convey that message back, and it begins with you. Start thinking anew. Don't think in old terms. And he's going on and on and on and on. I didn't come here to be lectured to with this guy. And so he keeps going on. I keep thinking to myself, I don't care what you say, it's still a commie. Finally, he realizes he's not making the sale. So he stops talking. And he looks up above his head in the cloud. It's pretty good, Mark, huh? And he grabs an idea, a thought. He looks back down, and he looks across at me over the table, and now his eyes are twinkling, and a little smile comes across his face. And he says to me, General, I'm so very, very sorry, but you will have to find a new enemy. I thought to myself, I don't want to. You got a good deal going here, man. You got your allies, I got my allies. You got your market share, I got my market share. Just because you're having a bad year, why do I have to change? He was having a bad century. 2 years later, something I never thought I'd see in my lifetime. The Berlin Wall came down. Germany unified. The Soviet Union fell apart completely. All those Eastern European nations became free. Gorbachev got pushed aside because he was a reformer and they needed a revolutionary to take over. And Europe was whole, free, and at peace. For the first time in several hundred years, no prospect of world war, Holocaust, or anything like that. It was a great triumph for the human spirit and a great triumph for American foreign policy. And we now are working with a Europe where we don't have to worry about the problems of the past. And we're watching the Russian Federation as it comes along. Now, don't worry about Russia becoming the Soviet Union again. Don't let anybody scare you like that. They're doing too well selling oil to the rest of Europe and to others throughout the world. You have to be careful. President Bush looked in Mr. Putin's eyes famously and said, I looked into his eyes and I saw his soul. I looked in his eyes too, and there's still a little KGB in there. It's not going to be the Soviet Union anymore. What a great triumph.